People sometimes ask why I left the ranger service, and I always give them the easy answers. I'll talk about the long shifts, the low pay, or the endless paperwork that nobody outside the job ever imagines is part of the work. I'll mention isolation, being posted for weeks at a time in cabins where the only voices you hear are your own mutterings and the occasional static chatter on the radio. I'll joke about hunters who ignore every regulation in the book, or about teenagers who think it's funny to vanish off the trail and trigger a search party. Those answers satisfy most people because they're ordinary, the kinds of complaints anyone might have about a tough job. But they're not the truth. The truth is darker, stranger, and every time I try to put it into words, I feel something stir in the pit of my stomach, as though even remembering it gives it strength again. Still, I need to speak it aloud before it consumes me entirely, because the memory doesn't fade, it sharpens. Every night when I close my eyes, I see a faint golden light swaying between the trees, and I hear my name carried on the wind in a voice that doesn't belong to anything living. That's why I left. That's why I'll never go back to that stretch of forest. The night it happened started like any other. It was late September in the Bitterroot Range, one of those nights where the air tastes of frost and pine resin, the whole world edged with the promise of winter. My post covered about 70 square miles of steep, pine-choked wilderness, stitched with narrow game trails and occasional fire roads that always seemed more abandoned than maintained. By autumn, the crowds had thinned. The families and day hikers were gone, leaving only seasoned hunters or the occasional lost tourist who thought they could tackle the backcountry with nothing but a gas station map. That night, my duties were routine. Patrol the northern fire road, check 3 backcountry campsites for signs of squatting, and log trail conditions before the seasonal closure. I had my thermos of coffee, my flashlight, my service pistol, and a kind of restless energy that comes from spending too much time in silence. Dusk settled quick and heavy in the valley, staining the sky purple and orange before surrendering to the encroaching dark. I left the truck at the trailhead and walked the loop on foot, listening to the crunch of pine needles under my boots, the occasional caw of a crow, and the long sigh of wind sliding through the pines. It was uneventful, too uneventful. Every ranger learns to read the mood of the forest, and that night it felt subdued, almost expectant. The silence wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind where you know every creature is holding its breath. I shook it off as nerves. Then I saw the lantern. At first it was just a flicker of gold about 100 yards off the trail, weaving between the trees. My first thought was that it was a hiker's headlamp, but the glow was all wrong. Too warm, too steady, with that distinctive honey-colored shimmer you only get from old glass lanterns burning oil. Campfires were banned this late in the season, and nobody had a reason to be that deep off trail after sundown. My hand tightened on the flashlight. I called out, "Hello? You need assistance?" My voice sounded thin in the stillness. The light paused, just for a second. Then it swayed, as though someone had shifted their grip. That should have reassured me. People do that. Not lights, but instead the hair on my neck stood straight, against every line of training. I stepped off the trail. The forest closed around me like water swallowing a stone. Branches clawed at my jacket. The ground grew soft with damp moss, each step muffled. My flashlight beam sliced forward, but the lantern always remained just out of reach, close enough to tease, far enough to lure. Sometimes it dipped, like its bearer crouched beneath branches. Other times it rose, floating higher than a human hand could hold. I should have radioed it in. I should have stopped, but something tugged at me from the inside, a pressure behind my ribs urging me forward, whispering that I had to see it up close. 15 minutes passed, maybe 20. My sense of direction slipped. Every tree looked the same, every shadow stretched the same. Then the woods opened into a clearing I had never seen before. That alone was wrong. I'd walked this beat for years, and I thought I knew every ridge and hollow. The lantern hovered at the far side of the clearing, suspended in midair, swaying slightly like it hung from an invisible hand. I lifted my flashlight. Nobody was there. The ground beneath the lantern caught my attention next. A circle 30 feet across, blackened as though fire had scoured it clean. No grass, no pine needles, just charred earth. My boots sank half an inch into ash, and when I lifted them, I smelled something faint and bitter like burned hair or scorched meat. I felt bile creep into my throat. The lantern flickered, and then a voice called out, "Ranger!" I froze. It came from the trees, soft and drawn out, not angry or threatening, but unsettlingly familiar, like someone using the cadence of my name without the shape of it. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. Silence. Then again from behind me this time, "Ranger." The light bobbed once, almost in acknowledgement, and then the woods erupted with whispers. "You came. You came. You came." The words poured from every direction at once, male and female, old and young, overlapping until my skull buzzed with the sound. My flashlight darted from trunk to trunk, but the beam caught only bark. Shapes flickered at the edges of vision, silhouettes too tall, too thin, limbs bending like wet branches, but every time I focused they dissolved into shadow. The lantern flared, bright enough to throw shadows across the clearing, and in that instant I saw faces in the ground itself, mouths stretched in silent screams, eyes bulging in terror, pressed into the ash like fossils trapped mid-death. I staggered back, nearly dropping my light. The flame sputtered. Darkness slammed in like a door. I ran. Branches whipped my cheeks raw. Roots caught my boots. The voices followed, shrill and desperate. "Don't go! Don't leave, stay!" Something huge crashed against a tree behind me, shaking the trunk so hard pine cones rained down. But I didn't look back. All I cared about was reaching the road. My lungs burned. My legs churned until I burst onto gravel, gasping and drenched with sweat. My truck waited 50 yards ahead, silver beneath the moon, as though the world were ordinary again. Behind me the forest was silent, watching. I slammed the door, jammed the key into the ignition, and peeled away. The entire drive back to the station, I couldn't stop glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see that lantern swaying among the pines, keeping pace with me. When I got back, I didn't log the incident. I couldn't. What would I write? Chased phantom lantern into haunted burn circle, heard the forest whisper my name. I told myself fatigue had made me hallucinate, that the silence of the woods had worked on my nerves. But that night in the cabin, as I forced myself through the paperwork, I heard the wind moan across the roof. Threaded in the sound was something else, a word. A single, stretched-out syllable, "Ranger." I told myself it was my imagination. Then 2 nights later, while pouring coffee, I glanced out the window and froze. A faint glow shimmered between the trees at the timberline. Not firelight, not starlight, steady, golden, waiting. I pulled the blinds and didn't sleep until dawn. I resigned the next day. Weeks later, long after I'd moved 3 states away, I still couldn't shake it. The glow haunted the edges of my dreams. I started digging through historical records, searching for something, anything to prove I hadn't gone insane. I found it buried in a forestry report from 1912. It described a survey crew burned alive in a sudden wildfire. Witnesses said the blaze started without cause. No lightning, no campfire, no spark, just a wall of flame that consumed them where they stood. Survivors avoided the site afterward. They whispered about strange lights drifting through the trees, about voices calling men deeper, promising warmth and safety, only to leave them lost and frozen. The report dismissed it as local superstition, but I know better. And here's the twist I never told anyone that night in the clearing. When the voices surged and the lantern burned brightest, I thought I recognized one of them. Beneath the layers of whispers, I heard a voice I hadn't heard since I was a boy. My father's voice, calm and low, calling me the way he used to when I wandered too far from camp. My father had died in a hunting accident when I was 12. For a split second, that familiar tone almost rooted me in place, almost convinced me to stay. That was their trick, I realized later. They used what you longed to hear, what would make you step closer to the flame. If I hadn't run when I did, I don't think I'd be here telling you this. Sometimes I wonder if part of me never made it out. Some mornings I wake with ash on my tongue, the taste acrid and metallic. Some nights I dream I'm back in that clearing, and the lantern hovers closer and closer until I see my own reflection in its glass, screaming silently like those faces in the earth. And always, without fail, when I jolt awake, I hear it faintly in the dark, my name stretched and softened, waiting for me to answer. So if you ever find yourself walking the Bitterroot Range at night, and you see a lantern swaying between the trees, resist the pull. Don't follow. Don't listen when it speaks your name, because some hungers never die, some fires never go out, and some clearings remember every soul they've swallowed whole. And if you don't turn back, you'll join the others, faces pressed into the ash, whispering forever. People always think the scariest part of working as a park ranger is the wildlife. They picture bears breaking into cabins, or cougars stalking the ridges, or maybe moose standing in the road like walls of muscle and antler. And yes, those things will put the fear of God in you, but they're not what made me leave. The truth is, I could have lived with the claws and fangs of nature. What I couldn't live with were the things that walked like people but weren't. The things I saw one autumn night near the abandoned ranger cabin at Hollow Creek. To this day, even as I sit in a quiet room hundreds of miles from that forest, I still wake in the dark convinced I'll hear them scratching at my door, waiting for me to open it. And I know that if I do, I'll never close it again. The shift had started like any other. Late October, skies low and grey, air heavy with the damp of rain that never quite fell. My district covered a rough stretch of the Appalachians, miles of ridges and ravines where fog pooled in hollows and clung to branches like gauze. That night I was scheduled for an overnight patrol, routine check-ins on trailheads, a sweep of some fire roads, and a pass by Hollow Creek. The cabin there had been decommissioned years ago, but every ranger was expected to swing by once in a while, make sure no squatters or hunters had moved in. I hated that stop more than any other. The cabin sat half buried in shadow beneath a cliff wall, the kind of place that felt damp even in July. I'd only been inside once, years before, and swore I'd never do it again. Something about it felt wrong, as if the air was older than the forest around it. By dusk, I'd made my way down the gravel road, the truck's headlights cutting weak cones through the fog. My radio hissed occasionally, bursts of static that seemed louder than they should have been in the silence. I parked a quarter-mile from the cabin, killed the engine, and let the woods close in. It was quiet, too quiet. Even in October, you should hear owls, crickets, maybe the rustle of deer. That night there was nothing. Just my boots crunching gravel and the pulse of my own blood in my ears. When the cabin came into view, my stomach dropped. The door, which had always been padlocked, stood wide open. My first thought was squatters, maybe kids or hunters looking for shelter. I drew my flashlight and called out, "Park Ranger, anyone inside?" My voice sounded hollow. No answer. I stepped onto the porch. The wood sagged beneath me, groaning like it didn't want me there. The beam of my flashlight cut across the interior, dust, cobwebs, the skeletal remains of furniture. Empty, but the smell stopped me cold. It wasn't rot exactly, not mildew either. It was sweet and metallic, like blood left too long in the air. My skin crawled. I swept the room again and froze when the beam touched the far wall. Symbols had been carved into the boards. Circles, jagged lines, spirals that hurt my eyes if I stared too long. They hadn't been there before. My mouth went dry. I took one step inside, just one, and the floor whispered. Not creaked. Whispered. Like voices seeping up through the boards, too faint to make out but undeniably human. I backed out fast, heart hammering. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not behind me, not inside the cabin, but circling the clearing itself. Soft but deliberate, pacing just beyond the reach of my light. Who's out there? I barked, hand going to my pistol. The steps stopped. The woods held their breath. Then from the trees came the sound of something breathing. Slow, wet. Wrong. I should have left right then. I should have run back to the truck and driven until dawn. But training and pride anchored me. I stepped off the porch, flashlight sweeping the tree line. And that's when I saw them. At first I thought they were people, tall thin figures standing just inside the fog. There were 3 of them, maybe 4, motionless, their faces pale as if lit from within. But when my beam hit them, the truth sank in. Their faces weren't faces at all. They were smooth, hollow ovals like masks carved from bone. No eyes, no mouths, just emptiness. One of them tilted its head, and I swear I felt it studying me, though it had nothing to study with. My throat locked. The breathing grew louder, surrounding me, though none of them moved. My hand hovered near my gun, but some instinct screamed that bullets wouldn't matter. Then they did move. Not forward, not closer, but all at once their heads snapped back in unison, as if staring at the same point in the sky. From the cabin behind me came the whispering again. Louder now, dozens of voices all overlapping. My flashlight flickered. I turned just for a second, and the carvings on the wall seemed to writhe, the lines twisting as if freshly cut. When I whipped back to the tree line, the hollow ones were closer. 10 feet closer. My light sputtered again. Panic surged. I shouted, "Stay back!" But the words fell flat. They tilted their heads again, and the one nearest me finally opened. Not a mouth, not really, but a split tearing across the smooth surface of its face. The sound that poured out was worse than any scream. It was laughter, bubbling and ragged, laughter that didn't stop even when the split stretched impossibly wide. I ran. Branches lashed my arms as I tore down the road, flashlight bouncing wildly. Behind me the laughter multiplied, overlapping into a chorus that followed without footsteps. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop until the truck loomed ahead. I fumbled the keys, dropped them twice, finally wrenched the door open and slammed it shut behind me. For a moment I just sat there, shaking, listening. The woods outside were silent again. I dared a glance in the rearview mirror and nearly screamed. In the reflection just beyond the reach of my taillights, the hollow one stood lined across the road, motionless, waiting. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I hit the gas and didn't look back. Not once. Back at headquarters, I said nothing. I filed a report about the cabin door being open, left out the rest. But I couldn't shake it. Nights later, sitting in my apartment off duty, I woke to a sound scratching at the window. When I pulled the blinds, the street was empty. But in the reflection of the glass, I saw pale shapes behind me, smooth faces tilting their heads in unison. I spun around, nothing. I told myself I was losing my mind. That's what anyone would think. Until I got the call. Another ranger new to the district had been sent to check Hollow Creek. He never came back. His truck was found parked at the trailhead, engine still warm, door hanging open. They searched for weeks. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers, nothing, no tracks, no sign of struggle. Just gone. That was when I quit. I packed my things. turned in my badge and drove until I couldn't see the ridges in my rear view. I've never gone back. Still, I know they're not bound to Hollow Creek. I've felt them near sometimes in places they shouldn't be, quiet alleys, lonely stretches of highway. Once, in a grocery store at night, I swore I saw one standing at the end of an aisle, its head cocked, faceless mask glowing faintly under the fluorescence. When I blinked, it was gone. But the next morning, my bathroom mirror was fogged, though I hadn't showered, and drawn in the mist was a circle crossed with jagged lines, the same symbol from the cabin wall. I don't know what they are, or why they watch, or why they sometimes choose to follow. Maybe they've always been here, older than the trees, waiting in the fog for someone foolish enough to notice them. Maybe the cabin was just a doorway, a place where their world and ours bleed together. What I do know is this: once you've seen them, once you've heard that laughter, you never stop being seen in return. So if you ever find yourself near Hollow Creek and you pass that ruined cabin, do yourself a favor. Don't step onto the porch. Don't look too long into the trees. And for God's sake, if you see pale figures waiting in the fog, don't shine your light on them. Because if you do, they'll tilt their heads. And then they'll know you forever. The first time I drew assignment near Stillwater, I brushed it off as campfire talk meant to keep rookies on edge. Old rangers had their collection of stories. Feral people living in caves, staircases in the middle of the forest, lights that danced without fire. So when they told me, "Don't linger by Stillwater after sunset or you'll hear them," I smirked, thinking it was another initiation joke. I stopped smirking the night I had to answer my first missing hiker report there. It was early September, air sharp with the promise of fall, when a couple flagged me down at the ranger station. Their son had gone out alone to fish the lake around noon, and by dusk he hadn't come back. They'd found his gear on the bank, tackle box pack, even a half sandwich in foil, but no sign of him. I drove the dirt switchbacks up to Stillwater and found the parent's story true. His stuff was there, neatly set down, rod leaning against a log, cooler lid open. The water was glassy, moonlight cutting a perfect silver trail across it, but the boy was gone. I called in search and rescue, and we spent the night combing the shoreline with dogs and flood lamps. Nothing. At dawn, divers went in. They scoured the lake, dropping down into its cold green silence. Still nothing. After 3 days, the official word was accidental drowning, body unrecoverable. But the parents never had a funeral, because without a body, what do you bury? I watched the grief eat them alive, and I couldn't shake how carefully his gear had been placed, as if he'd stepped away only for a moment, except he never stepped back. Over the years, more vanishings piled up. Her kayaker who never reached the far side, 2 teenagers sneaking out for a midnight swim, an old man collecting water samples for his university research. Every single time we'd find belongings on the bank, or a boat adrift, but never a body. Locals started calling it the Hungry Lake, and some refused to camp within a mile of it. I should have treated that as warning, but rangers are stubborn. We're trained to trust what we can measure, track, or test. Folklore wasn't part of the job description. Still, I couldn't ignore the unease that grew each time I patrolled near Stillwater. The air there felt denser, not heavier exactly, but thick in a way that muffled sound. Birdsong faded before it reached the shore. Wind slowed. The only noise you heard was water lapping, soft as breathing. And sometimes, if you stood there long enough, you'd swear the water was breathing with a rhythm, a pulse almost in time with your own. I tried not to linger, but one night I broke my own rule. I'd been called to check a campsite near the North Inlet after reports of unattended fires. By the time I got there, the fire was out. Campers long gone, nothing left but beer cans. Stillwater shimmered not 50 yards away, moonlight stretching across it. Something tugged at me, a prickling curiosity. I walked to the edge. The surface was so still it reflected the sky perfectly, stars burning in liquid black, and then, without warning, ripples spread out from the center, slow and deliberate, like something massive had shifted below. I froze. The ripples grew into waves, lapping the shore, and just as suddenly it stilled again, flat as glass. My radio crackled then, a harsh burst that made me jump. I turned from the water, hands shaking, and I swear I heard my own name whispered behind me, soft and drawn out, as though spoken underwater. From then on, I avoided the lake after dark. But Stillwater had a way of pulling you back. Rangers rotated shifts, and my turn came again in late October, when the aspens were shedding gold leaves and the air tasted of snow. A call came through, a woman screaming near Stillwater, hikers reported. I sped up the mountain roads, tires spitting gravel, lights bouncing off tree trunks. When I got there, the hikers were pale and frantic, insisting they'd heard the cries from the lake itself. We set up spotlights, beams stabbing across the water, and in that cold white glare we saw her. At first I thought it was a person wading just offshore, a woman waist-deep, hair plastered to her face. She didn't thrash like someone drowning. She stood perfectly still, arms hanging, head tilted. My gut clenched. "Ma'am, hold on, we're coming," I shouted, waving to the rescue boat. But before they could launch, the figure sank. Not fell, not slipped, just dropped straight down like the water opened beneath her. No bubbles, no struggle, gone. We combed the lake again, divers pushing their limits, but there was nothing. Not even silt disturbed where she'd stood. The hikers swore they'd heard her scream before we arrived, but I can't explain what I saw. That night, lying in my bunk, I dreamed of her. She was closer now, standing at the foot of my bed, water streaming from her hair, lips moving soundlessly. I woke gasping, sheets damp with sweat. My radio powered off, hissed faint static. I started asking around quietly about Stillwater's history. Most rangers shut me down, saying it was bad luck to dig too deep. But one retired old-timer, Johnson, gave me a piece I'll never forget. He said the lake wasn't natural, that before the dam was built downstream, the valley had been a village. A flood took it out over a century ago, drowning everyone. Families, children, livestock all swallowed. The damming deepened it, and what was left became Stillwater. They never left, Johnson said, eyes hollow. The lake keeps them. Every soul it takes just adds to the chorus. After that, I started noticing things. When fog rolled off the surface, faces seemed to press against it, features half-formed in mist. On calm mornings, the ripples spelled shapes that looked like hands reaching. And more than once on patrol I heard voices, faint, tangled, overlapping, whispering just beneath the waterline. My name among them, always my name. The last straw came in winter. A storm had rolled through, heavy snow smothering the ridges, and I'd gone up to check the access road. As I passed Stillwater, something caught my eye, footprints. Bare human footprints, crisp in the snow, leading from the trees straight down the bank. I stopped, heart hammering, and followed them. They ended at the shore. No return tracks, just a line of prints that vanished into black ice. I crouched there, breath fogging, and for the first time I truly felt it, the pull. Not just curiosity, not just fear. A physical tug, as if the lake wanted me to step in to finish the trail those prints had started. So I staggered back, legs weak, and nearly slipped. That moment burned itself into me. If I'd gone one step farther, I don't think I'd be here to tell this. I reported the prints, but no one else wanted to talk about them. The official note just said animal tracks misidentified. I know what I saw. I can still see the toes, the arch of the foot. Each detail etched in snow like someone had walked barefoot out of bed and into oblivion. I don't patrol near Stillwater anymore. I asked for a transfer and got it. Some nights, though, I dream I'm back there. I'm standing at the shore and the water's black glass again. This time there's no figure, no screams, no ripples, just silence. And then the reflection shifts. It's not the sky above me I see. It's faces, hundreds of them, staring up from beneath, mouths moving in unison. When I wake, my throat tastes like lake water. You can call this superstition or stress or a ranger gone too long without a good night's sleep. But I'll tell you this. If you ever find yourself near still water, don't stop to admire the view. Don't dip your hand in. Don't listen when the water whispers your name. Because once it knows you, it never forgets. And one day when you're tired or careless or curious, you might take that one step too far. And if you do, don't expect anyone to ever find you.